When I look at our history, I realize that our history is not negotiable. It's not defined by slavery. It is a profound history, and we need to teach it in honesty. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Erudition Network. I apologize for being a little bit tardy tonight. We had a major upgrade on some things that we needed to, I had to do tonight to be able to get on with you all. But I want to welcome you to another important session of the Erudition Network Black History Interactive. To all of you all who have been with us from day one, I want to say thank you for joining us again. We see you, we appreciate you, and your weekly commitment to watching these programs and participating and coming on for the interactive. Sean Anthony, thank you for being here and joining us tonight. I'm gonna have to change the title a little bit. I am so quick to just go off of what it actually is, but I realized as I was starting the program, just out of force of habit, I made the title to be what it is. The hidden history from Negro Fort, which is really what it was called historically by people. But in fact, I think I'm going to have to change it. I know I'm going to have to change it because, YouTube and different things will not, they don't want you to be that open, but it was just my, just me typing and not realizing. So I will change that to Fort Mose, and hopefully that won't cause us any issue. That was a later name that was used for it, but that is one of the issues with the title. So if there is any issue with that, it'll be resolved later if you try to click initially, and then after the program is over and you can't get in, that's what that was, right? So we will correct that as it goes. Anyway, I'm happy to be here with you tonight, going over this important topic. Tonight, we're going to hit some things that may seem a little sensitive, but it is definitely something that we have to talk about. And we're going to spend some time talking about the police state, and the use of police, law enforcement, military, and other things in the United States historically, how they have been used, how they have been used to intimidate, to put Black people, particularly, into a situation of defense. And so we're going to kind of go into that tonight. Full, disclosure, some of this stuff may be a little bit upsetting. Doesn't mean you shouldn't learn it, but I just want you to know that, some of these things that we're going to talk about tonight, it's truth, it's facts, it's Black history. It's not watered down. There will be no distortion. It will be as it was reported by sources, and it will hopefully connect to you so that you understand where we are and why we need to be aware. History is alive, it's breathing, it's something that continues every day. The patterns may repeat, but it is with us every day. So we're going to go deep. And I just wanted to make sure I walk you to it. We're going to talk about some massacres. We're going to, that maybe you were never taught about in school. From Memphis, Colfax to Elaine, Arkansas, Rosewood, Tulsa, Jackson State. We'll talk about Andrew Jackson, the president of the United States, and how he bombed and killed men, women, and children. We'll talk about black codes and stop and frisk and the use of this current president's use of the National Guard, older president's use of the National Guard, how this is not necessarily a Republican issue. This is a bipartisan issue. This is something that has been going on for quite some time, right? Even since the beginning of this country. So today, we're going to do that deep dive, but I need you to engage. This isn't just history. This is an interactive. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint that, show you the blueprint, but I want you to get you a notepad, take notes so you can remember names. I want you to share this episode. But most importantly, I want you to take this knowledge to educate yourself and then to educate others. So let's just go ahead and start. Let's start where, we're going to go beyond. I was sitting here today trying to think about how would I start it? But I want to talk about 1704. 1704, South Carolina created the first formal slave patrol system. 1704 in South Carolina. But understand, this wasn't just some random thing of vigilantes and thugs. These were government appointed, sanctioned military units with the legal right and authority to stop, search, interrogate, beat, punish, and even kill any black person that they encountered who could not explain why they were out alone. And if that sounds familiar to you, then I want you to think about where we are right now and what we are with stop and frisk and all of these other things that have been used against black people, particularly. But overall, this is something that goes beyond the beginning of this country. So there's a straight line that draws back to about 400 years ago to when the first slaves or the first black people arrived in Virginia, in which they put slave patrols out. Before today, how many of you who may watch the recording, how many of you knew that? How many of you, you may have known about the slave patrols, but did you know how far back it goes? Because here's the thing. It was a direct predecessor to what you see with the modern police departments. Government-sanctioned people who were allowed to arrest predominantly blacks, right? And to take hold of you. Here's another thing, what they don't teach you. In 1738, Spanish Florida created what is known as Fort Mose, right? It was the first legally sanctioned free black settlement in what would later become the United States. Hundreds of fugitive slaves from British colonies and others had made it to Fort Mose for freedom. They built the thriving community. They served as militia. They lived as free people. It was black, white, indigenous. And they lived there. But state apparatuses, whenever black people or people of color or come together with others to create an autonomous space, we have found in American society that something comes along to destroy it. To destroy it. The destruction of Negro Fort and others, right, were designed, right, to take away from people the ability to be citizens, to self-govern themselves, to be allowed to live as human beings. And so when we look at this, we have to be honest about it. The Battle of Fort Mose is a key part of what would be called the War of the Jenkins here, where Spanish forces, including, all of these folks were attacked. They were just an example of an initial attack. And though they looked at it as a stunning victory, right, for the Spanish and their allies, they took over and reclaimed Fort Mose, killing people and showing that the European governments, whether it be British, whether it be Spanish, whether it be whatever, had no problem in destroying Black lives. This is just the beginning. I want you to go, because I don't have time to go into deep into every one of these. Go look up Fort Mose. Go look up to what they did. Go look up General James Overthrow and look at what they did and why they did it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's over and over again, precedents are set. Things are done to put us on a back foot, to hurt us. When we move forward and we look into 1816 Florida, a state which doesn't want to teach you Black history. Florida, a state that says, we don't want to teach you a history that's going to hurt your feelings. I often talk about Negro Fort, and I often talk about what happened in 1816. I think I've talked about it several times in the past, where Black people should remember it like they try to remember the Alamo in Texas. But almost no child in school is taught about Negro Fort. In 1816, Spain, right, controlled the territory in Florida. And in it, it was an old British fort from the War of 1812. And in that fort were hundreds of Black people, escaped slaves, natives again, Seminoles predominantly, Chickasaws, Creeks, some white farmers who decided that they wanted to live in that society, that triuniversal society, all wanting to live free at a sanctuary, defiant to what the racism of the day was stating. What chants and statements of, we will not allow chains or go back to chains. But because of this thing in Florida, the plantation owners in the South got scared. They saw this fort as a threat. They saw it as a bunch of free Black people, indigenous people, right across the border, who they said could attack them. And Andrew Jackson, the man who the current president sees as a hero, who was not yet president, right? He saw and claimed that Negro Fort was a threat. So on July 27, 1816, he launched an attack with cannon fire. The explosion blew up the fort. They kept attacking, and historians try to downplay it and say, oh, there was only 100 or so people. There was a pretty large community. Hundreds of people were killed. Men, women, and children, indigenous, Black, just killed. And those who tried to escape were executed. Those who were not executed were then taken and put into slavery. Again, the Florida Historical Society tried to maintain records of this and from the military reports of the time. But this has been suppressed in the idea of rewriting history. This was one of the largest, biggest threats against Black freedom in the United States, killing hundreds at that time, killing hundreds of people, harming others and enslaving even more. And when we think about this, the first time that the U.S. military bombed a fort on its continent in any way, it wasn't to go to war with the Spanish. It was to destroy and kill free people, particularly free Black people. And you have to ask yourself then, what does that say about America's priorities? What does this say about America's thoughts on Black life? Thank you, brother, for joining us. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. That when we consider that they would use the military to attack people in another, unless I want you to consider something else. The Spanish own the territory. Any other time when you go into someone else's territory and you launch a military assault, that is an act of war. The Spanish pretty much gave that area over to America. Andrew Jackson used his notorious attack on Negro fort, right, to launch the Seminole Wars, which we don't get taught about in school, and to attack indigenous and Black people long before the Trail of Tears, long before his time as president, and use this attack as his way of securing his legacy and his fame. But beyond all of that, this set a pattern. Hello, Eric. How you doing? Glad you're here. And again, we see this pattern. Again and again, we see these attacks. As I told you, when we start looking at the slave patrols and the birth of policing and how we took this idea of suppression of Black people to hold them down. And for some of you are saying, well, it's not just Black people, but they are the ones who took the brunt. White men were willing to cross international borders to destroy free Black communities in the name of national self-defense, in the name of their superiority. National self-defense. Where have you heard this recently? This type of rhetoric. We must defend our borders. Yes, Black soldiers were heavily involved in the assault of Fort Mose, June 1740. And in fact, the militia led the surprise attack to recapture. Yes, I wouldn't necessarily trust your AI, but that is correct. Just further in your research. I appreciate that, brother. Keep doing so. It is disgusting. Let's think about something else. Let's think about the Haitian Revolution, right? Because there's another connection in hidden history. The Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804 scared the people over here in America. When enslaved Africans in Haiti successfully beat the French and overthrew their oppressors, Napoleon's army, one of the largest and toughest armies in history, to create the first Black republic, the slave owners and Americans over here panic. Thomas Jefferson, who we are told was this great political person as we grow up, right? The same Thomas Jefferson who wrote the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he was convinced, and he wrote in the 1790s, right, that the West India Islands will remain in the hands of Black people, and that the only thing that had to happen is that they had to go back, because a total expulsion of whites sooner or later would take place. They would kill them. He incited the idea that these people living in Haiti, in a sovereign place, were a threat. And so in 1803, Congress banned the immigration of any Black, mulatto, anyone with mixed blood from Haiti, or even suspected of mixed blood. They were so terrified of the idea of Black people living autonomously or living free that they made it illegal for Black people to even come near America. And when Haitian refugees or Haitian people tried to reach the American shores, Blacks, they dispelled them or put them into slavery. Whites, they gave them refugee status, welcomed them. Christian societies helped build them homes. That's a fact. And that's 1803. It shows you a selective of how America will allow certain immigration, certain people to come in the country, and how they create a rhetoric of division. I want you to draw these parallels as we talk about this tonight. I want you to think about that. Our nation morphed into this patrolish idea that Blacks were threatening. I told you earlier, when they established those slave patrols that later became constables and police officers at what is now our modern police force, which has a DNA and an idea, right, to restrict the movement of, to enforce racial hierarchy, built into their DNA, to profile, to stop you if you're in the wrong, what they consider to be the wrong place, to surveil you, to enforce the peace. If you've ever been stopped simply because you were driving while Black, or questioned just because you were somewhere that they felt you weren't supposed to be, or unfortunately the Black men who have been in prison, some for decades, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, This is the descendant. This is where that came from. Why? Because after the Civil War, right, something happened that had never happened in this country. Black people were given constitutional rights. They were given political power through states in the South like Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, et cetera, et cetera. We had black legislators. We had black folks join these police forces. You had black judges. All of this happened. And people got scared. Wait a minute. They can go wherever they want to go. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except as a punishment of a crime. Remember that exception. And right there in that exception, those who felt threatened saw opening. They saw opening. They found a way to pass what we now know as black codes, laws that made employment, unemployment, employment, certain employment was not considered legal, valid. Unemployment, loitering, and failing to show that you had a viable job put you under these black codes, which were then enforced with vagrancy laws, homeless laws, wrong place, wrong time laws. And once you were arrested, you could be fined. And if you couldn't pay that fine, you were jailed and you were leased out to plantations, to mines, to work the railroads. And I talked to you all a long time ago about the convict leasing. That's what it was. It was just another form of slavery. And Christian groups, former abolitionists, co-signed these ideas because they felt coming out of Reconstruction, oh, wait a minute, they can be around my wife, my kids, they could be in our communities. We got to stop that. So when people tell you that slavery ended in 1865, or slavery effectively ended with the passing of these constitutional amendments, that's a lie. That's a lie. The device to enslave changed from a club, a whip, to simply the sheriff or the policeman in that town. You were sold in the courtroom when you couldn't pay a fine. These are realities. These are things that were going on in our country. And honestly, right now, they're still going on. They're still going on. And when they couldn't get you with the law, they turned to violence. Look at 1873, the Colfax Massacre. One of the first massacres we'll talk about tonight. Easter Sunday, 1873, Colfax, Louisiana. There was a contested election. And black politicians went to the courthouse to protect, their elected officials from what was then called Dixiecrats or white Democrats, who were trying to overthrow that government and take control and power illegally. And in the scene reminiscent of January 6th, hundreds of armed white men, a lot of them who were members of the Ku Klux Klan, alt-right, whatever you want to call it, supremacist groups, they surrounded the courthouse. They pulled up with a cannon that had been used in the Civil War. And when they threatened these people who were meeting to do what they had the right to do politically, the black people decided, hey, we don't want this, we will leave. Instead, these hundreds of white men killed these people. Hundreds of black men were murdered. They went in and they singled out particular agitators or black Republican politicians and executed them outright. Here's what's important to remember about that, and how politics and law. 3 men were convicted. 3 men were convicted. And under the 1870 Enforcement Act, that was supposed to be in place to protect. But less than 5 years later, the Supreme Court of the United States, in a case called the Supreme Court versus Cruikshank, overturned their convictions and then said that the 14th Amendment didn't apply to the actions by the individuals who killed these black people. And why is that important? Because Cruikshank versus the Supreme Court established the idea by the U.S. Supreme Court that the court cannot interfere in state crimes done against black people. It effectively ended the federal protection of black folks' civil rights. And it was the door that opened the Jim Crow era. How many of you remember me talking specifically about Cruikshank, United States versus Cruikshank? I know I've mentioned it many times before. How many of you? How many of you ever heard about Cruikshank in school? How many of you have ever been told about the United States versus Cruikshank beyond tonight? Beyond tonight. White men will always die during this, but I will tell you, brother, that this issue with this, right, is beyond the search. We always underestimate the amount of people who were killed. So whereas whatever you pull said an estimated 62 to 153 black men were murdered while surrendering to a mob, it's more than that. Because what we don't talk about, and what is also not mentioned in the Colfax massacre, but is talked about from firsthand events, is how over a period of 3 to 4 years, they kept killing black people. They kept murdering. It is what it is. When the courts upheld the idea that you have no protection, that was on purpose. Post-slavery, post-Dred Scott, you have no protection. And it is a scary thing to know that your government would do that. That they feel you don't need those protections. Now, we talk about Tulsa. We talk about all of these different things now. But a lot of us don't know about Cruikshank, and that was something significant. The Colfax massacre was so significant that it changed how we are treated in our own country. And I want you to think about that, because if we don't know that, after we talk about convict leasing, all that, but that right there, the U.S. Supreme Court, think about where we are right now, ruling that there's no protection for you and starting a whole era of Black people being oppressed and minimized in society, despite having constitutional rights. No matter what you say, they decided to create a new form of slavery. How many of you know about the pig law? Put it in chat. How many of you know what the pig law was? Predominantly in Mississippi, but what was the pig law? Anybody? Type that in here. Because I want to know if you know what this is. It's 80 y'all in here. Somebody can tell me. Even if you don't know, just say, I don't know. All right. Nobody wants to comment. I mean, y'all can search it, right? You all are searching stuff in here right now. The pig law, right? States passed what was called a pig law. Yes. Theft of a farm animal, a felony. But here's the funny part. Black people could do things with a pig, a cow, or food that a lot of white people, they couldn't do, because the Blacks had been cooks. They understood how to use everything to be able to feed their community. So they made a law, made a felony with a very harsh sentence, right? If a white man stole a pig or a cow or whatever, or killed your pig or your cow, even by accident, he got a slap on the wrist. It was a misdemeanor. It was fine. A Black person faced years in prison. The pig law, just due to a lot of times of accident, was the result of many Black people, right, going to jail. Estimates say from 70 to 90% going to jail and convicted of petty theft, fabricated charges. The sheriff would show up and say, hey, there was a pig stolen. It must have been you that stole the pig or ate the cow, because y'all like pig. And they would lock them up. They'd put them in jail. And then they became part of state property. Mississippi was one of the worst places who used this law to grow their prisons. When you hear about pig laws, vagrancy laws, convict leasing, the taking of your protection by Cruikshank, do you see how there was this beginning of mass incarceration, this idea of locking up Black people because I can then put them back in slavery? Do you still see the ideas that led to the current era's establishment of stop and frisk? Do you see how you can be stopped in a traffic stop just because you happen to be driving a nice car? Do you see the pattern? And if you don't, you're lying to yourself. The system didn't just go after the poor, because we hear that a lot. It went out to criminalize Black people for being Black. And it profited. People were put into systems for the rest of their lives, many of them, to serve as counties, states. States. This is what happened. So if we establish from Negro Fort to slave patrols to vagrancy to taking away your rights, all of these things are designed to chain you. And when Reconstruction collapsed in the early 1900s, violence happened. Whole communities were burned. Because when I cannot get you with the law, now I'm going to do something to you physically. Because as blacks started to do well, despite all of these things, they decided that they would kill. And this is the part of the discussion tonight that gets sensitive to people. Because it's painful. Our ancestors didn't like to talk about it. They didn't want to talk about it. What did you say here? We clean the land for all these highways, and these Jim Crow laws should be a part of reparations, as well as Tulsa and Rosewood. I don't disagree with you. The idea of not giving reparations is crazy, because the first thing that we always hear is, well, slavery happened a long time ago. Well, let me open some stuff up to y'all here tonight. 1866, year after the Civil War, Tennessee blew up. Memphis, Tennessee. Black Union soldiers came back from the Civil War. They had their uniforms on. They were proud. They had fought for their freedom, and they symbolized this idea of the country changing. And white people didn't like that. So over the course of 3 days, right, in May in 1866, a bunch of white mobs, right, which were policemen, firemen groups, went into black neighborhoods and black communities of these newly freed people, and they killed. Again, history will lie and give you a small number. But firsthand responses, they killed black men, women, and children. They burned down hundreds of homes. They burned down schools so that black kids couldn't go to school. They burned down churches. And we know this because firsthand, secondhand reports. But the Freedmen's Bureau report minimizes the number. The fact of the matter is that the Memphis Massacre of 1866, excuse me, is significant because the police, the law enforcement, they targeted these families. The firemen, they targeted these families. And the Freedom's Bureau people documented. They documented how these groups, these firemen's groups, which were racist groups of the time, and policemen beat, arrested, and killed, and allowed mobs to go into these communities while holding other people back. But we don't know about the Memphis Massacre of 1866. We don't talk about it. Right after the Civil War. Right after. They didn't respect your freedom. So when we talk about that, and we already talked about the Colfax Massacre, it shows you a disregard. And when the laws were passed, right, to eliminate your protection, for the next 20 to 30 years, violence increased. The Wilmington coup and violence and massacre in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. Blacks had come back after the Civil War and helped to build up the South, particularly the Carolinas. And Wilmington was a big a part of that. They had doctors, they had lawyers, they had teachers, they had public officials. They had newspapers. They were building something with whites and rebuilding this war-torn, bombed-out city. If you go back and look at the Carolinas after the Civil War, they look like Nazi Germany after World War II. Whole streets blown apart. But white supremacist politicians launched these things called the white supremacy clubs, the Lily White clubs, these clubs that spread the lies that black men were a threat to white men's wives, to their daughters, and that they were trying to control you through the government. And this rhetoric went on for so long that in November of 1898, armed white men who were being led by elected city leaders stormed Wilmington, North Carolina. They burned down black businesses, black newspapers. They killed hundreds of people again and forced politicians, including the mayor, the sheriff, and others, to resign from their positions at gunpoint under threat of death. This was a coup. This wasn't slavery. This was 1898. They went in and stole everything that people had gone to rebuild, not just for the black people, under the idea that we don't want to be ruled or even negotiated with someone who was black. A multiracial government was overthrown. And because of laws passed, because of the stance of the United States government, the perpetrators never faced any punishment. Matter of fact, a lot of them took those positions illegally and served in them offices. You don't know nothing about the coup. Nobody talks about the Wilmington coup. Nobody talks about the Wilmington massacre. I've looked through and read the history, the firsthand responses, what people had to go through, but nobody talks about it. So when we talk about Tulsa and these other things, let's understand how the law, the police, the military is used by the government. Look at East St. Louis, 1917. People were moving north, get away from the violence in the South. During the Great Black Migration, they were going to go take factory jobs. They were doing these things. And even though they were being used as strike breakers to take jobs that whites felt that, you know, they were being used to draw down the wages. Just like in the riots in New York. And white workers, other than blaming the bosses who were doing it, in 1917, in July, white men, along with a lot of their sons, and this is documented, some as young as 12 to 15 years old, ran through black neighborhoods beating men, women, and children, shooting into homes, burning down houses, and lynching them on trees and light posts in broad daylight, and taking pictures of it and sending those pictures throughout the country to family. This is real. And the President of the United States and the officials in the country said nothing. The NAACP did a silent march of Black men, women, and children in protest to the silence, in protest to people doing nothing about this massacre. 2 years before Red Summer, before 1919, the East St. Louis massacre was horrible. Let's talk about 1919. We've talked about that before, but one I don't usually talk about is the Elaine, Arkansas massacre of 1919. How Black sharecroppers were organizing for fair pay. They just wanted to be paid fairly by white landowners. And they went in and they held a meeting in a church. And when they held that meeting, white people got scared, and white folks said, oh, they're plotting to attack us. But the important thing that we need to remember about the Elaine massacre, and the reason that I included in our discussion tonight, is because law enforcement played a part in the attack. The governor called in federal troops. And instead of protecting the rights of these Black citizens, they joined in the slaughter. Again, historians minimize the numbers, but there are mass graves in this country, ladies and gentlemen, that people are finding. They estimated that maybe up to about 200, 300 people, Black men, women, and children were killed. But it's probably more than that. And the residual violence that happened outside of the area because people had a bloodlust is just as bad. And let's remember, this was during 1919, which is considered Red Summer, and it was part of a larger thing of whites attacking and killing people throughout the country. And here's the thing. Those who survived the Elaine massacre in 1919 were arrested, tried, and convicted of murder. The survivors. The survivors. And it took years for people to overturn some of those convictions. They were survivors of a massacre, and our courts in this country blame the victims who had their rights violated by law enforcement and soldiers. 1920, the Ocoee massacre, Florida. Black citizens on election day, a lot of them World War I veterans, simply wanted to vote, which was their right. White people got enraged and they attacked. And again, 100 or more Black people were killed. Black homes and churches burned down, Black communities destroyed. People fled from the town. It became a sundown town where Black people did not live for decades, simply because the Black folks who lived there wanted to vote. This is before Tulsa in 1921. I'm telling you these things because I want you to understand. And Tulsa was bad too. When they stormed Greenwood, they looted, they did all. And again, this was also the people, right, who were supposed to be there to protect the police, the firemen. This is real. Rosewood in 1923. I'm not going to go so far into Tulsa and Rosewood because you know these stories, because they've been presented to you, not by school books, but they've been presented to you in public, most times after the fact. And how hundreds of people died in those two towns. But you may not have known about Memphis. You may not have known about Colfax. You may not have known about Wilmington. You may not have known about East St. Louis, Elaine. Because we tell these stories and give the history that is so painful only in retrospect. Out of all of the ones that I just talked to you about, and that's not even all of them, how many did you actually learn about in school? Which ones are new to you tonight? Which ones are you going to get off of this episode and go look up for yourself? Because they erased it. They revised it. The purpose tonight is for you to see the pattern. Whether it be Negro Fort being destroyed by the military, whether it be the slave patrols that turned into the police, black codes, Jim Crow that criminalized your freedom, whether it be the massacres that told people that they could go in there and kill you, whether it be the law by the Supreme Court that said it was perfectly okay because the federal government can't do anything to stop it. I'm going to go a little bit over in this episode tonight because there's so much to unpack. But one of the things I wanted to talk about also is how grassroots this is too. We talk a lot about the military and the police, but when you think about white supremacy in the Jim Crow area or in the era that we're in now, we picture the Klan. We picture hoods, burning crosses. Over the last couple of years, people with tiki torches. But see, there's another face to that. That was just as powerful, that is just as significant, and just as relevant today. In the 50s and the 60s, they called them the White Citizens Council. A lot of these councils formed in the 50s, right after the Supreme Court's Brown versus the Board of Education. The founders of these clubs were doctors, lawyers, bankers, politicians, police officers, etc., etc. They wore ties. They look like businessmen. You can go back tonight and go look on other parts of YouTube or whatever, and they sat on school boards and chambers of commerce. They sat over companies. And they made it their business to make life hard for Black people. And see, unlike the Klan, the White Citizens Council, they didn't go ride out in the middle of the night and lynch people. No, they wanted your Black money, but they wanted it their way. They used what is called economic and political power as their weapons. They are the ones who said you wouldn't be able to vote for your mayor, your governor. If you were a Black parent who wanted to enroll your kid in a school, they were the ones who decided where your kid would go to school. If you tried to put your kid in an affluent school or a white school or someplace that they didn't want, you might lose your job, your ability to take care of your family. If you worked at one of their factories or their stores, and the boss was a member of that council, even if he was a minor member, because they had a hierarchy too, they put pressure on him to fire you. If you had a mortgage, the bank owner will suddenly call in your loan illegally. But who's to stop him from enforcing it? If you rented a house, they kick you out. They comprise lists of who were agitators. They comprise lists of who was part of the NAACP. They had spies in the churches, on your job. In 1955, on an interview, one of the members of the White Citizens Council said, "We don't have to lynch a Negro to keep him in his place." What did he mean by that? And you say, well, Eddie, this doesn't have any relevance today. Yes, it does. Because see, though you think it's just private intimidation, the White Citizens Councils work hand in hand with the state government. We saw that as the Civil Rights Movement started. In Mississippi, the state created the Sovereignty Commission. Go look that up. This was a taxpayer-funded agency used to spy on civil rights activists and was implicit in the death of many civil rights workers, black, white, and whatever. And they passed whatever intel they had, grassroots, to the White Citizens Councils. So while the Klan was seen as they foot soldiers that would go out and burn and kill and murder, these councils, these commissions, they operated in broad daylight. They sold you your goods, your clothes. They rented your houses. They had membership drives. They had newsletters. They appeared at churches. Governors and senators and people in high government proudly proclaimed, "I'm a part of the Citizens Council." It wasn't fringe. You ask yourself today, how can people be doing the things that they're doing and suppressing folks' rights and sending federal troops and doing all of these things? It's grassroots. Whether you call them MAGA, whether you call them White Citizens Council, whether you call them Sovereignty Commission, it's all the same thing. And you have to ask yourself, what's more dangerous? The hooded man with a torch who's hiding, or the banker who can kick you out of your home? The school board member who can say what your kids can and cannot learn? The politician who could pass a law, a lie, who could pass a law to stop you from doing things that you have the right to do? They can cut off your job, your ability to do anything. And we are under this illusion that the hood is more powerful than the suit, and not seeing that the suit was always there running the hood. Baba Dick Gregory said, "You mad at the wrong white people." And you ask yourself, well, Eddie, why does that matter? That's 1950, 1960. We came out of the civil rights movement. Why does that matter? But if you don't see the pattern today, then you are deceiving yourself. Think about these groups right now who are lobbying for voter ID laws, who are blocking Black history, who are finding ways to block Black voters by gerrymandering in Texas, and removing your ability to vote. Think about these so-called think tanks that have been around for decades that ban the teaching of our history, who have public speakers and folks in media who sit there and lie and talk about critical race theory, who talk about DEI and bring up these talking points to demonize free thinking. Think about these wealthy owners who are sending millions of dollars into campaigns, Republican and Democrat, to restrict programs, to limit your representation, to criminalize your protest. How are they related to these old citizens councils? Think about how the citizens councils use Black people, agent provocateurs, to go within your own protest and undermine it, to do violent things, to down talk it, to give the talking points of the other side, to hold press conferences, to say that we're defending law and order, tradition. The function is the same. Suppress, suppress, suppress. Do it under the cover of respectability, and they'll buy it. Oppression don't always have to come with a noose. Sometimes it just comes with that eviction notice, that pink slip. Sometimes it comes with passing a law or gerrymandering something so you can't even have a voice. That's where we are right now. That's what we're dealing with. And this is why we have to have these conversations. This is why I'm going to go a little bit longer, about 30 minutes longer, because it has to be said. We are fighting on all fronts, and we're ignoring it. We're ignoring it. We're telling ourselves that there's really no big issue with it. And we think that it's a political sectarian thing. By the end of the 60s, going into the 70s, the civil rights movement had won a lot of victories. A lot of the Voting Rights Act, et cetera, school being legally desegregated. But every time there's a ground won, because you don't control the system, it finds a way or a new tool to use against you. In the 70s and the 80s, we called it law and order. That was the new phrase. Law and order. And law and order wasn't about keeping everybody safe, as they say. You hear it in the news even today. Current president and other folks, law and order, law and order. It was a code. It was about criminalizing people of color. It was about criminalizing Black protests that had been effective. It was about criminalizing Black poverty. It was about criminalizing our children, Black life. Nixon, who was president at the beginning of the 70s, his aide, right, John Oakman, got up years later, decades later, and admitted. He admitted. He said, we knew, and I paraphrase, that they couldn't make it legal, right, to go in and terrorize Black folks. So what did they do? But they got into the public sphere to associate Blacks, hippies, liberals, as you call them, all of these people with heroin, drugs, and breaking the law, criminalizing them. saying that they were out to destroy the country. And if they could do that, then they could disrupt those communities. That's what they did. They created the war on drugs to criminalize black folks. It was never about drugs. It was about political control. Nixon had a picture with him shaking the hands of Elvis Presley, who later died from the amount of prescription drugs he was taking, while telling everybody else that the black drug dealer, the black weed seller, was public enemy number one. And they were arresting black men for having marijuana. And they were filling the prison systems. When Nixon left office, under the shadow of what he did, and the other presidents came in, whether you look at Ford and you look at Carter, they kept this idea going to some extent, both. As much as I like Jimmy Carter's, the reality was that war on drugs never went away. So by the time Reagan came into the office in the 80s, Reagan said, wow, we really need to double down on this. And they escalated the war on drugs to a new level. During the beginning, from 81 to 89, they doubled down on sentencing laws for minor infractions. They militarized the police. They gave them federal funding to go in and destroy black communities. And then they came up with the 100-to-1 crack versus powder cocaine. In other words, white folks could get powder cocaine. Black people were making crack. We're going to demonize crack worse, and we're going to make the sentencing 100 times worse. We're going to get them addicted to this. I used to tell somebody, who gave these folks the science, the chemistry, to be able to go in and make crack? Because it's not a process that you just think of. The size of a few sugar packets have been in jail for the rest of their life, because they had studied and realized that powder cocaine at the time was more popular with white users. And they had concentrated the flow of crack cocaine into the minority communities. And their mass incarceration exploded, because now we have put gasoline on it. Remember to say no to drugs, Nancy Reagan? Now we did that, and now we're going to lock up these people. They said it was a criminal epidemic until their people started getting addicted. Then it became a public health issue. And black people, sadly, almost all of us know someone in our families, in our lives, right, whose life was destroyed by crack cocaine, either by the use of the drug or the laws that were put into place to lock them up for the drug. And that's just the reality created by a policy. And when Reagan left office, his vice president, George H.W. Bush, came in. And he didn't stop it. He kept it moving. He gave a national television address holding up what was proposed to be a bag of crack cocaine. He lied. It was later found out to be a lie, and said he had sent someone out to buy it across the street from the White House, because DC was Chocolate City, a lot of black people. And then it was later figured out that the DEA basically set up a person, a young black person, to make it happen on the camera. And what did Bush do? He used that to call for more police, more prisons, harsher sentences. Black people out of control. We got to stop them. Whole communities destroyed. And if you think I'm picking on the Republicans, I'm not. Bill Clinton did just the same. Matter of fact, when Bill Clinton came in office, the Violent Criminal Control and Law Enforcement Act, the super predator, what did it do? It added thousands of police officers. It created more prisons to house these black people. Billions of dollars. It expanded the death penalty. It encouraged white people to see black folks as a threat to the state. Folks who were addicted to drugs, folks who had been addicted to drugs from the time of being a child. And though Bill Clinton later admitted that it was a mistake and that he does better responsibility for the mass incarcerations. But at the time, he did exactly what was expedient for white America. And he didn't write a cross the board thing to free folks who had been jailed unfairly. Bush Jr. came in after 9/11. And what did he do? He created the Department of Homeland Security, and then they put more militarized forces into the police. The police now had tanks, bazookas, SWAT raids, and no-knock warrants were routine. Even if it was a non-violent drug charge, even if you went to the wrong door, you would destroy someone's house, throwing flashbangs into a house, hurting babies. This is bipartisan. This is a failure. I see someone said something about, look at the karma now with them like zombies with fentanyl. Yeah. And I'll get to the Joe Biden crime bill. But Barack Obama can't be, even as a black president. Representation matters. But we have to be honest. The Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, during Obama's presidency, though it reduced the crack versus powder disparity, that 100 to 1 down to 18 to 1. It didn't eliminate it. It just reduced it. Even more so, Obama signed Executive Order 13688, which was supposed to restrict police access to certain military equipment. Armored vehicles, grenade launchers. But it did nothing. It was an executive order. He couldn't get it passed with his own party. Why is that? And so when he left office, we went right back to doing it. What he didn't stop was the mass surveillances, the deportations, the riots in places like Ferguson. And we could talk about Trump and what he did. He rolled back a lot of these things, letting the police gain access to tanks, grenade launchers, rifles straight from the Pentagon. He deployed federal troops and forces into Portland and DC in 2020. They gassed and beat people up so that he could take a picture with a Bible. And we already see what's going on with the second term, with the DC National Guard, with the people that are being deployed into California. And every time it's an attempt to occupy a major black area at will. So that we can look at that and say, well, that's horrible. But even when Biden came in, and even though he admitted that his 1994 crime bill, it went too far and he was part of all of that super predator, he didn't stop the mass incarcerations, the cash bill, the aggressive policing, the abuse that's still going on. Why? Because as they tell you, we're here to support everyone. We're not just the president for black people or people of color. Doesn't matter the administration. Doesn't matter what you think, red or blue. I don't care about that. They found ways to criminalize, surveil, and cage and allow the status quo to continue. From Nixon's war on drugs to Reagan's crack laws to Clinton's super predator to Trump talking about tanks in the street, every one of them has played a part in the criminalization of black people. I know we've gone an hour. I got 10 more minutes. I want to get to this last part, which we will then do part 2 next week. But this is important to me because I have 4 black sons. The last thing I want to talk to you before we get ready to get out of here tonight is the criminalization of black children. It's painful. But here's the truth. The system, as we know it in America, doesn't wait until black kids are grown. It treats them, and a lot of times criminalizes them even as children. There is a psychological term, my wife later on, she could probably talk about it on her show, but it's called the adultification bias. We have done studies that have been published by the American Psychological Association, right? The APA, that show that black boys as young as 9 to 10 years old are seen by police, by teachers, by white people even as more dangerous and less innocent than white boys of the same age. So what does that mean? That means that your son, your 8-year-old son, is not given the benefit of the doubt for telling a teacher no. He's not given the benefit of the doubt from running from a police officer. He's not given the benefit of the doubt for sitting out in front of his house. He's not seen as a child. He's seen as a threat. Multiple studies show black girls are seen as needing less nurture, being overly sexualized, needing less protection, being strong so they don't need no comfort. So that means that they can be disciplined harder. They could be molested. They could be suspended more often. We don't need to feel sorry for her as a girl in the way we feel sorry for a young white girl who may cry because you said something harsh to her. You are killing the innocence of our children because you are profiling and criminalizing them based on these things we talked about earlier. This is why, as we look through this history, that when we said men, women, and children, were being killed. We didn't talk about, and this is painful, the sexual assaults that were done against young Black girls during these times of lynching. We talk about Tamir Rice, who was shot in 2014 at 12 years old, just playing in a park with a cap gun. And we can hear the call of some white person calling, saying there's a kid pointing a gun at people. And within 2 seconds, an officer jumped out of the car and ended the life of this young man. 2 seconds. No questions asked. And they refused to charge him. Even the Department of Justice closed this investigation under a Democratic president without a charge. It's crazy. That's a lie. I remember back in 72 in Long Beach, a Black woman, young man, age 12, a Black young man, age 12, as myself, was shot and killed because a white woman said he looked in the window. It was said they did this up north. Yeah. You can't be in the wrong place at the wrong time. You don't get the benefit of the doubt. And the question was asked, if Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old white boy playing with a cap gun, dressed like a cowboy, would he have been shot in 2 seconds? You have people walking around in open carry. And here's the thing, Ohio was an open carry state. It's happening in our schools. They told us there was a school to prison pipeline, and then we wonder why they don't want us to educate our children. Federal studies done by the Department of Education for Civil Rights. Think about that. The same Department of Education they want to close down their civil rights section, which they've already closed down, showed that Black students were suspended and expelled up to 5 times more than white students. Even if the behaviors were the same, even if they did the same thing, if they got into a fight, if they cut a class. And when they found that Black women were going to school and seeking higher education more than anybody, Black girls faced harsher disciplines than any other group of girls, right? Asian, white, or whatever. The government did a study and showed that Black girls were far more likely to be referred to law enforcement to put something on their permanent record, as we were told, if they got into a fight in school because somebody touched them, touched their hair. They were being punished. They were being criminalized early. If she was found kissing a boy, and they're feeding these records into the justice system and using it as further fodder. So when your child gets in trouble or something happens, that's on their record. And whether we talk about Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, it doesn't matter. The whole reason that George Zimmerman felt he could kill Trayvon Martin and get away with it was because he profiled a 17-year-old boy as a criminal. Jordan Davis shot in the car by a white man who didn't like that he had his music up loud and decided he was going to shoot in the car because he told him shut up. What about Anion Stanley Jones, the 7-year-old who was shot in her sleep in Detroit when the police wanted to do a raid for a reality TV show? What about poor Khalif Browder, 16 years old, who spent 3 years in Rikers Island with cutthroat criminals? and spent most of it in solitary confinement simply because someone has said he stole a backpack. And he was so traumatized that even years after being an advocate and getting out of school or out of jail, he killed himself. 22 years old. Ask yourself this question as we get ready to close this episode out. How old were you when you had an adult, whether it be a teacher, a cop, a neighbor, someone, treat you as a criminal, as a person of color, and you knew it was unfair? You hadn't done anything. It's not abstract. It's not something that's just happens and people lie. It's generational. When we talk about the criminalization of Black children, we're not talking about isolated tragedies. We're talking about a system that has gone back to the beginning of this country. This is the direct descendant of so many other violations, whether it be the vagrancy law, whether it be the pig law that we talked about, whether it be convict lease, whatever it may be. The same logic is still used. Black existence is suspicious. Black existence is something that we got to be careful of. Black life is expendable. And when the people were screaming law and order, it didn't apply to us. It didn't apply to our kids. I want you to consider this. I'm going to get ready to sign out of here tonight. This was a very deep lesson, and I know it took about 1 hour and 30 minutes, and I knew that it would, and we have other things I want to cover with it. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you, all of you who stuck with us. We traveled a long way through this, probably more about 400 to 200 years of history. But I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know about these Black codes, the pig laws, the convict leasing. I wanted you to know about Colfax, Wilmington, East St. Louis. I wanted you to know about the so-called respectable racism that goes on in these think tanks, which are the children of the White Citizens Council, the sovereignty boards, men in suits who are still trying to destroy Black lives with pink slips, foreclosures, school policies, government policies. The fight against our civil rights workers, whether it be COINTELPRO, the murders and assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Fred Hampton at 21 years old in Chicago for trying to create a unilateral multiracial force to picket for the rights of human beings. We talked about the presidents, from Nixon all the way to Trump, and what is going on, how they failed us. Talked about the victims of our young kids, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Kylie Browder. We have tanks rolling through our neighborhoods. We got people still trying to go and fight. Know the pattern. See the pattern. Because you see whenever Black people want to be free and want to have their rights, the system responds. Chains aren't always visible. Chains are not always visible. They can be linked to your mind. Whenever we build wealth and they steal it or they burn it down, whenever we vote, they suppress it. Whenever we protest, they militarize against it. Hear me tonight. If there's one thing, though, I want you to hold on to, because I don't want to end negatively. Black people have survived the cannons fired at Negro Fort. Black people survived the massacres, the programs, the laws. We survived convict leasing. We've survived Jim Crow. We've survived the murder of our civil rights workers. We've survived the war on drugs. We're still here. People like me and others are still out here building, teaching, resisting, remembering, trying. When you watch this episode, I want you, in a word of faith, to type in your comments, we are still here and we ain't going nowhere. That's our testimony. That's our word of faith. That's our power. That's the legacy of our ancestors. Remember that. I wore my shirt today. I don't know if you all can see it. My shirt says, "Dear ancestors, I understand the assignment. I understand it. We're supposed to be better. We're supposed to be stronger. We must hold up to that." So I want to leave you with that tonight. We still here. Our history is not criminal. It is not disposable. And as I often said at the beginning of my program, it's not negotiable. We type that in there. We still here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. I know my wife, them are probably like, man, he's on a long time tonight, but this was an important message for me. It resounds with me. Because our children have to grow through this. Thank you for all of our new viewers, listeners. Share the program. I put our tag on here. If you want to help with the Erudition Network, we have a Cash App. It's $ the Erudition Network. It's at the bottom of the screen. $ the Erudition Network. And whatever you send goes in helping us building these programs and buying the equipment that we need. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, beloved loved ones, stay safe, stay smart, stay committed. And until next time, remember what I said. Type in there, we still here and we ain't going nowhere. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Be blessed.
From Eddie K. Phillips, founder of the Erudition Network, comes 101 Black History Questions, a groundbreaking book that challenges what you thought you knew and uncovers the stories history tried to hide. Perfect for classrooms, families, and curious minds. Get the digital copy today on Amazon.